DeAndre Washington will be the chalkiest player on the slate this weekend. Should he be in your GPP lineups? And there's a new starting quarterback in Carolina. How will that impact their skill position players? Hello and welcome to the Week 16 edition of the Footballguys Daily Fantasy Power Grid presented by DraftKings. We're going to start with Vegas over with John Lee. John, tell us, what are the Vegas lines telling us about the Week 16 matchups?
The first thing that jumps off the page at me, Austin, this week is that it's a short slate. We've had bye weeks for a lot of teams over the past, 8 to 10 weeks. And, this week we've got 3 games on Saturday. We have 1 Sunday night game, 1 Monday night game. And ultimately that trims us down to about 10 or 11 games on the main slate. So your player pools this week, if you're mass multi-entering, they should be smaller. And the number of games we have to select from in Vegas are also smaller. At the top of the list in terms of implied team totals this week, Seattle Seahawks. They host Arizona coming off of that game against Cleveland last week. Seattle, they're 11-3 this year, and they're playing at home as 9.5-point favorites with a 30.3 implied team total. It's the highest on the slate. So guys like Chris Carson are looking good. We know we love to target those tight ends against Arizona. Maybe this is a week to go back to Jake Hollister. We'll talk a little bit about how to handle that team and so forth. But just below them, Baltimore. Baltimore goes over to Cleveland, to Devin's Browns. They're 10-point favorites as well. 29.5 points in implied team total. So, Lamar Jackson, he's priced up. He's juicied up. The question is whether or not he's still cash game viable, which is probably something we'll talk about in about 30 seconds. After that, Indianapolis is at home against Carolina, and Will Grier leading the opposite side of that offense. They're almost 27 points. Atlanta and Jacksonville. Atlanta's a 7-point favorite against the Jags, who have done nothing to stop opposing running backs. And then kind of the game that's interesting to me that I'm sure we're going to get into is the battle of the basements. And we've got a couple of them, actually, but the one I'm thinking about is Miami and Cincinnati, and whether or not are those defenses just so inept that the offenses become viable. It's an interesting conversation, and it's certainly something we'll talk about as the show moves on this evening.
That's one of those games where you just sort of like hold your nose and you kind of watch through your fingers and you go, I hope there's fantasy points at the end of this game.
Oh, no. We're going to get there. My favorite player on this slate is in that game.
Oh, yes. Okay, good. I like that. Well, let's go to you and find out whether it's a quarterback, Devin. Speaking of quarterbacks, looks like the 2 notes we have are kind of minor. New quarterback that John mentioned there for Carolina, and then Daniel Jones could be back after missing 2 games to play at Washington. Devin, tell me, who do you like at quarterback this week?
It's not Dalton or Ryan Fitzpatrick.
I figured, but I just, I wanted to be sure.
We'll get to my favorite player in a little bit, but
yeah.
Quarterback's tough. I'd love to play Lamar Jackson.
Everybody would.
But that's not possible.
Oh, no.
We're going to get – at least in cash, I don't see a scenario in which you can build a safe lineup as of where we're at today.
There's not a lot of injuries this week to free up a ton of, value, right?
Well, it's a combination of that and in a short number of games make it limited options. Some people might go down to Alex Erickson to save money, but we'll get there, and I'm not doing that. But is there any love for Will Grier?
No.
The matchup could not be better.
They waited this long to start him when Kyle Allen looked the way that he has. How good must Will Grier be? And even his coach this week said he's not quite ready, but we're going to throw him out there.
Big vote of confidence.
All right, so let's just talk this through. So the Colts secondary has all but fallen apart. They've allowed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 quarterbacks to throw for 295 yards or more. The last 2 weeks, they've allowed 4 touchdowns per game. Could he just dump it down to Christian McCaffrey and get to value?
He's getting Greg Olsen back for this game more
200 yards, a touchdown. It's a little bit of mobility. I don't know if I love it, but at the price of $4,300, we've been talking about this all year, that you really don't need much.
Here's what I wonder.
Yeah, so Phil, what do you think here? What do you think, Phil?
Well, here's what I wonder. I was actually looking forward to coming on tonight to get Devin's take, and not to put you on the spot here, but I know that you know the college game a lot better than I do. And I know that coming out, the people that I listen to, the analytics guys, really liked Will Grier. Then he came out in the preseason and he had a 65 passer rating. Like John said, it took 6 straight losses and Kyle Allen looking atrocious for him to get the green light. And he's now had 1 week total all season to practice with the starters. So there's not a lot going in his favor. I do think he's going to dump it off to McCaffrey a lot, but just from a prospect standpoint, like, where do you stand on Grier? Is this a guy that has NFL starter talent or not?
I mean, he's a third-round pick, so it's hard to say he has starter talent. I think that far too often we like the guys on the bench. But does Kyle Allen have starter talent? No.
I think we've spent too much time on the Carolina.
I'm playing him in cash as of now unless value comes up.
Wow.
I just don't see a scenario. Now, there could be an injury. There could be something come up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I want Christian McCaffrey in my lineup, and that's, to me, the only way to do it.
I see.
So we'll get there. But I think that Grier is in a great spot. I think that the other guy I do like quite a bit this week is Matt Ryan at home against Jacksonville. How much does this Jacksonville team even want to show up after firing
Tom Coughlin?
Tom Coughlin. And it just seems like the culture there is absolutely atrocious. The Jaguars, I mean, you can basically do whatever you want with them. Again, they've allowed 250 yards or more in 4 straight games. Just not good quarterbacks. And it's a scenario in which I think the Falcons are still playing for Dan Quinn. I think they're still playing hard, and they're going to come out and win this game. So for me, I'd love to go to Lamar Jackson, but I just can't. I'm going Will Grier.
And I generally don't trust the running game of the Atlanta Falcons. So even if they're favorites, it doesn't necessarily mean a game script where they're going to run like crazy. Phil, let's go back to you. By the way, Phil Alexander back filling in for Ryan Hester, who's out on assignment. We miss you, Ryan, but we're glad to have Phil here. Please tell us more about the quarterbacks you like, Phil.
Sure. And just a quick reminder to the listeners that most of my slants are going to come from a GPP standpoint. I don't play cash games. So just keep that in mind as you listen to me. My favorite quarterback play this week, and it's kind of getting ruined by this shoulder injury that he's dealing with, and he hasn't been throwing in practice the last couple of days, but I think Dak Prescott is going to be okay. He said tonight that he would be, and assuming that shoulder is a non-issue, I think that he's got the ceiling that we're looking for in tournaments, 6 games this year with at least 28 DraftKings points. And if you look at Philadelphia, the last 3 games, they faced Ryan Fitzpatrick, who put up 365 and 3 touchdowns. Eli Manning was ice cold coming in off the bench for the first time since week 2. And for at least a half, he made it work against the Eagles. And then last week, you just had the granddaddy of them all with Dwayne Haskins having a career game. And he is, without question, one of the bottom 3 quarterbacks that I've seen this year. I think Dallas is just a more talented team than Philadelphia at this point. They're a pass funnel defense because they're tougher to run against. And I see Dak Prescott having one of those ceiling games. The prices on his stacking partners, Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, are both fair. I think double stacks are in play. So I really like Dak Prescott. And then very quickly, I'll just touch on that Indianapolis-Carolina game one more time.
Will Grier, I know.
No. I'm looking at the other end of it for tournaments, right? You got the spot that I always like where you've got the home favorite, a heavy home favorite in Indianapolis. They're favored to win by a touchdown. People are going to be looking at the running game because Carolina is atrocious against the run. And you're going to have Jacoby Brissett at probably, 2 to 3% ownership. And I think it could just as easily be Brissett that has the big day with Hilton now back. Jack Doyle's capable of beating that defense. So in tournaments, I don't mind taking a stab there on the heavy home favorite who's going to be low owned.
Right on. John, who are you playing at quarterback? Or can you find a way to get Lamar Jackson into your cash game lineup?
I'm glad you asked, because as these guys were talking, I tried to build a cash game lineup with Lamar Jackson, and I was able to do it. Now,
there's no CMC in that lineup.
That is correct. What I didn't get into that lineup is CMC, and we should talk about that when we get there. But whether or not the Carolina Panthers are going to be able to sustain drives to make CMC as legitimate cash game play this week as he has been. But we'll talk about that in the running back section. The two guys I have for cash this week: Russell Wilson against Arizona, $7,000. I think that he's in a spot where he should deliver 3x on his value or close to it. He comes at a $1,000 discount from Lamar Jackson, and he also has a higher implied team total. So I'm happy to save the $1,000 and roll with him.
And Steve Buzzard has him as his highest owned player, both on FanDuel and on DraftKings for quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, the guy, if looking at it, I will give this to Devin this evening. On my terms of my metrics and odds of reaching value, Will Grier is at the top. I can't do it. Because this is just statistics and numbers, right? And he's got in terms of reaching GPP value, according to my numbers, 42.7% chance of reaching 4x value. Which would tell you, hey, you roll with him. But I think you've got to look at those numbers objectively and compare them against, the other numbers that are coming out. I can't do it. I know where he's coming from. I'm the one guy alongside Ryan, who's not here this week, who always says go with cheap quarterbacks because they're fairly consistent. For me, it's just I've never seen him play. And the Colts run this zone defense, which I think limits upside as well. All those reasons I'm staying away. On the cheaper end, Phillip Rivers against Oakland. He's 5,700. I think you could save some salary there and feel pretty good about it. Oakland, I think I have on my notes here that Oakland is 31st. Yes, 31st DVOA against the pass. They're equally bad against the run, so you can take that for what it's worth. But Austin Eckler, he catches a lot of balls out of the backfield, and those become points for Phillip Rivers as well. So those are two guys: Russell Wilson, Phillip Rivers, in cash. For GPP, I'll tip my cap to Phil. He might have just talked me into Dak Prescott. I think that was some really nice analysis there. I love Matt Ryan. In fact, I love all the Atlanta Falcons this week. We'll talk about them throughout the show, but I got a bunch of Falcons on my list, and I think that we've already I think Devin kind of led out with that against the Jacksonville narrative. And then, on the other ends, Seattle's got this kind of pass funnel defense of late. And so if you want to go opposite that, I think for GPP purposes, you could look at Kyler Murray against Seattle at 6,100. He's got a couple decent receivers there. I like the pairing with Christian Kirk. I love the game script and what could happen there. So those are a few of the guys I'm looking at.
Devin, you got any more quarterbacks before we move on?
No, I was just going to mention Murray. I think he's in a really good spot for GPPs because he burned a lot of people last week. We told you not to play him, but it tends to bring people away from him if they got burned in the last week. So I think he's in a really good spot this week, going up against a Seahawks defense that's allowed 19.9 DraftKings points or more since week 5. So I think in theory, if you had to, you could play Kyler in cash.
Right on. Yeah, especially if a salary is tight.
We've seen the games where he succeeds, and it's games where they fall behind, and he has a big second half. Don't watch the game. It's kind of Blake Bortles-esque, but he performs when they fall behind.
Nice. So
can I get into running backs?
Yeah, it's time to get into running backs.
Took my earpiece out. I got so excited.
Nice. Hey,
this is where your game. Yeah, I knew it. I was going to guess. I knew that's what you were going to say. And I agree for what it's worth. So you get a yellow guy.
Nice. Hey, be sure to join us in the YouTube comments. Tell us which picks you like. Tell us who you're playing this week, and mix it up with us in conversation down there. Running backs. We've got we led the show off with it. Josh Jacobs is out. That's going to make DeAndre Washington very highly owned. And then Kerryon Johnson might be back. So I don't know if that matters. So Devin, I'm just going to come back to you again. You're saying Joe Mixon.
Joe Mixon. I said last week that he was viable against the Patriots and he had 25 carries. But the volume that this guy is getting has been absolutely insane since really October. He's had 15 carries or more in his last 7 games. And he's been the only consistent offense that they've had. He's at 146 yards 2 weeks ago, 136 yards last week. And he's going up against a Miami team that, I mean, the matchup's just a phenomenal one. We saw Saquon Barkley break out of what was an abysmal season and kind of, paid off if you made the playoffs for your fantasy league with Saquon. I think it would have been tough to actually do that. But, he had 26.3 standard points. What did he have on DraftKings? 33 points on DraftKings last week for Saquon. And they've allowed 20 points or more to 3 of their last 4. It's a defense that I think Joe Mixon gets at least 20 carries. The Bengals seem like they're still trying, which is a bit of a surprise. I don't know if Zach Taylor's thinking he needs to keep his job or what, but they should be shutting everybody down, and they're not, which is a surprise. They should be going after Joe Burrow, securing that spot. I think that they beat the Dolphins this week. I think they beat the Browns next week. Why are they playing Andy Dalton and Joe Mixon if you're trying to tank? It doesn't make any sense. But they're the Bengals, so we're going to go there. And if Joe Mixon's getting 20 carries, then I'm in.
And they've been feeding him the ball even when they're really down in games, too. It's just
he had 30 carries when they lost by 35 points to the Ravens.
Yeah, it's kind of insane.
If you're looking for a cash game guy at 6,600, sign me up every single day. And guess what? People aren't going to do it because he plays for the Bengals. Yeah.
John, who are you playing at running back this week?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo the. I don't know that I think Joe Mixon is cash game viable, but he's definitely high on my GPP list for all the reasons that Devin mentions. DeAndre Washington against the Chargers, he's $4,000 this week. He's kind of that free space for cash games. You got to slot him in as long as Josh Jacobs he's not confirmed out as of Thursday night. Is that correct?
I thought he was confirmed out, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
I heard he wasn't playing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read that they're leaning towards not playing him, and that's why we're talking about it. I suspect this guy's going to end up being in cash games closer to 50% owned. Right now, I think Steve Buzzard's got him at 30% owned in tournaments. That's going to creep up to around 40%. Where I end up on that, read my article on Saturday. As of now, I would say I'm going to have somewhere around 40 to 45% exposure to him. But if it starts getting up above that, then game strategy will come into play for tournament play, that is. For cash games, the other guy I'm looking at, Alvin Kamara at 7,500. He's
what?
What? I didn't give you any offs. I didn't give you any offs.
It wasn't even a red black eye Joe. It was just like I can't even get to my red black eye Joe.
I can't even find my red black eye Joe fast enough.
Did you? Okay.
He's been so bad.
He's still getting the volume, and he's going up against a defense in Tennessee that's I think they're giving up over the past. Make sure I have this right. 21% points on the normalized strength of schedule tool. It's a decent spot for him. He had 19 touches last week, 17 the week prior to that. 15, 20. He's getting the touches. He just hasn't been getting into the end zone. Unless he's legitimately hurt, and if he was, I don't think he'd be getting that degree of attention out of the backfield. I'll continue to go after him at 7,500. I got one more guy on my cash game list, but I'm not even going to talk about him because I know that Devin
Leonard
will find
Fournette?
No, it's not Leonard Fournette. It's even lower than that.
Okay.
Where's your red black-eyed Joe? You got it?
No.
You make another one in 3 seconds,
All right.
like it was drawn by a 5-year-old. Go ahead, John.
I'm almost afraid to say it, but over the past 2 weeks, this individual has 39 touches. He's $5,000, and he's going up a team that's completely giving up, and that's the New York Giants. I think Adrian Peterson's in play this week as a cash game play, believe it or not. At $5,000, Derek Geis is not there to take anything from him anymore. I don't know what's going on with Chris Thompson, but he's largely not involved. In Adrian Peterson, believe it or not, caught 3 passes last week of all things. So I think if you need one last guy in $5,000 range for your cash games, you could do worse than Adrian Peterson this week.
You could do a lot better.
Oh man. Yeah. So I mean, he's no Patrick Laird. Go ahead, Phil. Who are you playing at running back this week?
All right. So at running back, I just want to bring the conversation back to Christian McCaffrey real quick.
Yeah.
And I don't want to spend a whole lot more time on Will Grier, but I was disappointed to see on Buzzard's projections that McCaffrey is currently right behind DeAndre Washington at about 23% on DraftKings, because my hope was that people were going to look at it and say, all right, Will Grier, maybe that dings McCaffrey's floor. Maybe I don't spend the 5 figures for him. And maybe in tournaments he was going to end up a little bit of like a mid-range value. But it seems like his brand name is just too well established at this stage, and that it's wishful thinking for me. So I still like McCaffrey, and Devin pointed it out before, like what else is Grier going to do besides dump it off to him? And how else is Carolina going to manufacture offense besides to just put the ball in McCaffrey's hands 30 times? I still think he's a good tournament play. And of course you really can't do much better in cash games if you could fit him. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, pure GPP play, I don't mind Nick Chubb. Chubb is going to be sub 5%. I think the last time I checked, Buzzard had him at 2%, and he's going up against Baltimore. And yes, they are 10-point dogs, but last time they played, Chubb absolutely destroyed them, 165 yards and 3 touchdowns. And of course, I'm not expecting another slate-breaking performance, but I mean, Nick Chubb leads the NFL in rushing, if I'm not mistaken. So anytime that you could get the NFL's rushing leader at sub 5%, I'm doing it. I think Chubb is probably one of the best 5 backs in the league. And in tournaments, that's the kind of play that I'm after. I'm not looking at 1% dart throws to luck their way into value that are bad plays. I'm looking for actual good players that are under-owned. And I think that Chubb fits the bill. I think that's how Cleveland could best move the ball against Baltimore. So I'm willing to take a shot there in tournaments and come in at 4 or 5 times the field.
John, you led off the show talking a little bit about Chris Carson and Seattle being heavily favored in this game. It feels like there's a handful of guys that, are solid plays, but they're tricky to fit into your lineup, like Chris Carson, Ezekiel Elliott, and Saquon Barkley, just because they're pricey on a slate where there's not a ton of value. What are you doing with some of these pricier guys that aren't CMC?
Excuse me. Yeah. Carson, it's tough right now. If he stays where he's at, I think last check I see he's about 11% on Buzzard's projections. I think that's fair for what the type of upside he brings to the table in this matchup this week. I could go with him. I just don't know if he stays at 11%. The issue I have there is he's coming off a game where he scored a pair of touchdowns in his first game without Rashad Penny. And I wonder whether or not that creeps up closer to the 20 percentile component going into the weekend. If it gets up to that point, which typically happens with heavy chalk, I might want to get away from him. So I think he's not a guy that if he gets up there that I'm going to be after. So around 10%, yes. Around 20%, probably no. Guy I want to talk about is Devontae Freeman against Jacksonville. Freeman's only $6,000. Jacksonville has just been a sieve in the front seven over the past 5 to 6 weeks. They're not doing anything to stop opposing runners. And, Freeman is getting looks. Last week he didn't do a whole lot, but he was going up against one of the better defenses in the league in San Francisco. He only had 14 touches. But prior to that, when he came back, he had 21 and 21 touches respectively. And this week he probably has the best matchup he's had looking at his game logs and probably since week 6 against Arizona, where he had 118 all-purpose yards and a pair of touchdowns. I think he's really a great play this week at $6,000. He's a guy that I'll be heavy on, providing the ownership stays somewhat reasonable.
It's really tough to get on board with Freeman when you've got guys like Eckler in the same price range or even Miles Sanders in the same price range. I know the matchups there. Maybe it's my I'm a Falcons fan, and so maybe my negative bias is playing in here, but it's rare that I see a big game from him for GPPs.
If I'm playing him, I'm playing him in cash on FanDuel at 6,200.
He's got the second highest implied team total on the entire slate. They're a 7-point home favorite. If he's ever going to deliver, this is the game script, the situation, the matchup, everything for him to do it. That's where I'm coming from. We'll see whether or not it comes to fruition on Sunday.
Yeah, I hear you. Devin, any other running backs you want to talk about?
No, I think we covered it.
All right. Please hit subscribe.
I'm just glad we're not talking about Leonard Fournette every week.
Nice. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, and give us a thumbs up. That subscribe button will help you know when we're back for next season, because this is our season finale episode. Wah, wah, wah. But we appreciate you riding along with us for 16 weeks. Let's talk about wide receivers. We've got Juju Smith-Schuster might be back this week. I don't know if that matters.
Doesn't.
Phil, let's go to you first and talk about wide receivers. Who do you like for GPPs this week?
Sure. I'll give you one for GPPs that's also viable for cash, and that's Julio Jones going up against this Jacksonville defense that has just given up on every level. They stink against the run, like John said, but they're also pretty terrible against the pass. We saw with Calvin Ridley out last week that the target tree in Atlanta has just completely consolidated. I mean, Jones commanded 51% of Atlanta's targets, a 20-target game against San Francisco. And, with Jalen Ramsey, a distant memory, Jacksonville has been allowing a lot of big passing plays. Only Detroit has allowed more passes of 25-plus yards over the last 5 weeks. And, the price is pretty good. He's $1,300 less on DraftKings than Michael Thomas, and only $400 more than Tyler Lockett. I think that makes him a relative bargain. And then on the tournament side, I think my favorite wide receiver play on this slate is Cortland Sutton. You've got Denver in a spot as a big home favorite, and there's a real chance that this turns out into just one of those horrible games between two lousy teams in Denver and Detroit. But I don't see David Blau having much success there. I think Denver's run game could help them sustain drives, even if Drew Lock isn't firing on all cylinders. And Sutton is that passing offense. Since Emmanuel Sanders was traded, you're talking about a 26% target share, 40% of the team's air yards, and he's the only Broncos wide receiver to even score a touchdown since week 8. So when you're looking at a Detroit pass defense that was torched last week by Brashad Perryman. They've allowed 38% more fantasy points than league average to wide receivers over the last 5 weeks. I think Sutton is a really strong play. And last I checked, he was at sub 10% owned on Buzzard's list. So I think he's strong for GPPs.
Yeah. If someone had only brought up Perriman last week, and then we're here this week to gloat about it. I mean, if they're not here to gloat about it this week, it's like it never happened.
It didn't
right?
happen.
It's like it didn't happen. Okay,
we didn't disagree with Perryman. Let's just be clear. We disagreed with him in cash, which was still the right move.
Yes.
Fair. Except for the 3 touchdowns he caught. But, I get what you're saying in concept. Devin, talk to me about some wide receivers.
Yeah, I think Julio is an interesting case. I can't do it in cash. And I know the game last week. I get it. I think it's a little point chasing. You look at his last, the rest of the season, and he's only broken 100 yards 3 times since week 3. If I'm spending $8,000 this week, I think it's a tough sell. I think it's salary is critical this week, especially until we can find value elsewhere, which as of today doesn't exist.
Surely there's a cheap receiver or something we can throw in here. Surely we have to, right?
There probably is, and it's probably Greg Ward.
But you don't feel great about it, right?
No, I think he's a possession guy. I mean, Greg Ward this is his first season. He's never really played receiver. He was a quarterback in college. But he's had 9 targets over each of the last 2 weeks. They don't really have anybody else to throw to in a game that they kind of need to win at 4,200? I don't love it, but he's probably in play. Keenan Allen is a really good price at 6,300.
Yeah.
The slot corner for Oakland is LaMarcus Joyner, former safety, former sub linebacker, first year playing corner. Keenan Allen should have a monster day out of the slot this week. And then Terry McLaurin, I think, is a really good GPP play. I don't know if I can get there in cash, but McLaurin seems to continue just to produce. I mean, we saw last week where he had 5 for 130 and a touchdown, which 57 yards or more in 4 of his last 5 games. It took him a little while to get, which was surprising because him and Haskins went to college together. But we saw it early in the season with Case Keenum. He's starting to build that same repertoire with Haskins. Haskins is starting to look a little more comfortable. And I think he's an excellent GPP play this week.
John, what do you think of these receiver picks? Who you got?
Let the record show that I put up 2 yellow black-eyed Joes when Devin was speaking, which I think is the first time.
That's like
Merry
a record.
Christmas.
Yeah.
In the history of the power grid. So
Yes.
Take that for what that's worth. I will come back to a couple of the things that Devin said, however, and I'm going to disagree on the Julio Jones take. I get that he has only had a couple 100-yard games in that amount of time. And I'm the guy who just said something about point chasing earlier in the episode, but I think in this case it probably isn't point chasing because we cannot discount the fact that Calvin Ridley will not be on the field, and that's likely why he had so many targets. This is the second game that no Mohamed Sanu, no Calvin Ridley, and he's the guy. So from that end, I think he's got to be in play.
And Russell Gage really isn't a target monster as their second wide receiver.
No, and if anything, I think, I'm not making this recommendation. He'll probably be in my player pool at a low percentage, but it's not Russell Gage. I think Christian Blake is interesting from a tournament perspective. He's getting about 90% of the snaps. In fact, I think he led the team in from wide receiver position in snaps last week in routes run. So nobody's going to be on him because nobody talks about him. I'll have him in let's call it 3 to 5% of my lineups. Again, because I do like that team quite a bit. In terms of cheap guys for cash games, I get what Devin's getting at with Greg Ward, he was in my article last week as a cash game play. He got that touchdown, and everybody was happy. What do we think about Alex Erickson against Miami? He comes at about $1,000 discount from Ward, and
Devin hates it immediately.
I found it.
He's reciprocating the good faith, goodwill going into the holiday season.
Yep.
Erickson, in his first game out after Auden Tate's being injured for the season, Erickson captured 76% of the snaps. He ran quite a few routes. He's had 12 targets over the previous 2 weeks, and there were periods of time earlier in the season where this guy was heavily targeted, as high as 14 targets in a game. At 3,300 against Miami's defense, I think that's the route I want to take. I'd rather have him at $1,000 discount with no Auden Tate than going with Greg Ward, who's going to be the third or fourth receiver on his team against a much better defense. So that's an alternative for you.
Yeah,
if
third
I'm
or fourth
going that
receiving
low,
option.
I'm going Isaiah Ford if I'm going that low.
Yeah, I don't know that I can do that either. But I do. Greg Ward's not the answer to me.
I don't want to lose my Christmas money with an undrafted player named Alex Erickson.
Speaking of undrafted players, let me give you one.
Sorry, family, you don't get Christmas presents because of Alex Erickson. Like, that's just not.
Please use good bankroll management here during the holiday season. Don't bet your Christmas gift money on Alex Erickson. Yes, John.
This is the beauty of not having a whole lot of injuries, right? And because there isn't a lot of value. And from my perspective, I always like that for GPPs because it really forces you to make some tough and hopefully informed decisions. A guy that I like for deeper GPPs, and I'm not talking, if you're in a 100-man contest, don't play this individual. But if you're throwing out, DraftKings has some really cool contests this week. You should check them out and see. I'll probably talk about that at the end in terms of some of the things they're running on this special week. But Malik Turner for Seattle this week, $3,500. He is going to absorb that wide receiver 3 role behind Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Nobody's going to be talking about him, but he's going up against Arizona. Arizona, they're going to focus on Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And Patrick Peterson isn't what he once was, but he's certainly not going to be on focusing on Malik Turner. And Turner, he's been there, and he's running ahead of Jerron Brown. He's running ahead of David Moore. He's 3,500, and his team has the highest implied team total on the board. He's going to be less than 2% owned. Really think he's sneaky for those larger field GPPs this week.
And Josh Gordon with the suspension won't be taking up those snaps.
Implicit.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see, Devin, any other receivers you want to talk about?
Yeah, what about Jamison Crowder? We kind of forgot this monster game on Thursday night. And it's with how fast things move at 5,400 against Pittsburgh. How are the Jets going to move the ball? And maybe the answer is they're not. But they're not going to be able to run against. They're not going to be able to run against the Steelers. I think if they're going to have any success, it'll be a high possession game through Crowder. I don't really like playing Jets, but I mean he was impressive this past week. And then on the other side of the ball, how are the Steelers going to move the ball against the Jets? The Jets have a fairly good run defense. Deontay Johnson at 4,700 is viable as well. He's had 60 yards or more in each of his last 2 games, and he seems to be Duck Hodges' top receiver. So I don't hate this 4 to 5K range. I look at the top and I look at your Devontae Parkers and Keenan Allen's and those types of players as good in Terry McLaurin, like I had mentioned, as all good plays. But there really isn't that top end for me. And maybe it's Julio for a lot of people. I'm sure it is, but this week's strange in that there's either spend up or spend down. There's not a great middle option.
Go ahead.
Well, I think Deontay Johnson could get a little dicey if Juju Smith-Schuster is back. It might be a riskier play. I mean, maybe that just, takes more people off of him. And I'm not hearing a lot of talk about Michael Thomas. He's just so pricey on a week where you'd rather be spending up in other ways. I get the sense. John, what were you going to say?
What I was going to say is it's a shame that Ryan's not here this week because as our resident Pittsburgh fan and expert, I think, and Ryan, respond in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think at least what I've seen, we've gone through about 2 to 3 years where the Steelers haven't been able to cover a slot receiver to save their lives. But earlier in the season, after they get dusted by Tyler Lockett for 10 receptions and close to 100 yards, they did switch some things around, and they've shut down some pretty good slot receivers since then, pretty consistently for the past two to 2.5 months. So I think they're scheming differently these days, and that actually kind of makes me like Jamison Crowder a bit less for that reason.
And if you're going to play him, I would say his price is better over on DraftKings than it is on FanDuel. He's priced up a little more over on FanDuel.
And with the full PPR, I think it makes a huge difference.
Yep, exactly. Let's move on to tight ends. John, let's talk to you about tight ends first. We got Greg Olsen coming back this week after missing 2 games. That's about the only news and notes I have. Who are you playing at tight end?
I wish I didn't have to play anybody.
I like them all.
I really do hate the position this week. I was going through the list of candidates. I'm not going to take a lot of time because I don't have a lot of love for the position. I'll tell you in my cash games who I've got listed. Austin Hooper against Jacksonville. He's 4,400. I think that he reaches 3x value. I also like him for tournaments. Again, this is a recurring theme. You've heard me talk about Matt Ryan. You've heard me talk about Devontae Freeman, Julio Jones. I even threw in some love for Christian Blake, and now I'm talking about Austin Hooper. I would not play all of those guys in the same cash game lineup, however. So I just want to make sure.
Sound advice, John. Sound advice.
And the other cash game option I think is Hollister out of Seattle going against Arizona. We saw last week. I was all over David Njoku going into Sunday morning, and then we got a late scratch on him. And I didn't have the wherewithal to switch over to Ricky Seals-Jones, and of course he scores a pair of touchdowns against Arizona. We could see a very similar thing with.
It was the revenge game.
Of course it was. Yeah, I mean it just I wasn't thinking on the fly. I should have been thinking more cleanly. For tournaments. I'll throw one guy out, and that's Mike Gesicki in Miami against Cincinnati. He's $3,600, and I think I pulled this up before the show, and I left it up. Over the past 6 weeks, only 4 tight ends have been targeted more than Mike Gesicki, and he's only $3,600. So I'm happy to roll him out on a week where I really don't like the position.
I hear, John, I hear a lot this week about volume plays and maybe some regression, like back to some positivity here. Kamara needs some touchdowns, guys getting targets who aren't producing necessarily. It's a theme this week.
These are the things I look for.
Yeah. Hopefully that plays out. Phil, you did not like the Austin Hooper call. Tell us why not.
Well, I don't like the Austin Hooper call for tournaments because Buzzard's ownership projections have him at double the next closest tight end. And I just don't think that he's twice as likely to reach value as any other tight end. I mean, granted, he's 4,400 on DraftKings. He should be about $1,000 more. Clearly underpriced. Totally agree with that. We talked about the targets being consolidated in Atlanta, but the problems that I have with Hooper, the first one is that he hasn't done anything since returning from the MCL sprain. So, let's see him do something first. Let's see him prove that he's healthy again. Second thing is that if you look at where his production has come from this season, all of his big games, they've been in games where Atlanta was trailing. Matt Ryan was scrambling for his life against top shelf defensive lines that were just dominating Atlanta's offensive line. And he had to get the ball out quickly, and he was down by a lot of scores and dump offs to Hooper, and he would accumulate fantasy points. Is that going to happen against the Jaguars as good as the defense is? I don't know. I think there's more ways that Hooper fails than ways that he succeeds while 20% of the field is on him. So that's my Hooper take.
Yeah,
You're not allowed to say I don't know on this show.
I will.
You get slimed, and you can't do that on television.
Just a quick rebuttal there. Austin Hooper, I've got him at 21.8% to reach GPP value, which is double everybody except for Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry at 14%. So your argument does hold water, but only because Hunter Henry's on the board.
So, Phil, who are you playing at tight end in GPPs this week?
In GPPs, I'm looking at Dallas Goedert. He's down at 5%, and he's going up against the Cowboys, who are sorely missing Leighton Vander Esch at linebacker. Last week's performance by Tyler Higbee, you might write that off only because LA was trailing by a ton, and a lot of those stats were accumulated in garbage time. But the week before, the Bears threw out a pair of no-name tight ends that I still can't name, and they combined for 7 catches and 92 yards. So over the middle of the field is where they're struggling, and Carson Wentz's only viable targets are Ertz, who's also in line for a huge game, but he costs something like $2,500 more than Goddard, and over the last 5 weeks, there's only 5 tight ends in the league that have seen more targets than Goddard over that span, and that's Zach Ertz, Travis Kelce, Higbee, Darren Waller, and George Kittle. So you're talking about the best of the best, and I think that similar to those guys, Goddard has an athletic profile that enables him to capitalize on those targets. Hasn't really been there the last couple of weeks, but the volume certainly has, and that's what I'm chasing at the low ownership.
Devin,
what do you think about tight end?
This position's a dumpster fire.
Yes.
Hasn't it been like all season basically?
Yes.
No, I think that when you have Travis Kelce, I even advocated playing 2 tight ends last week. I think there are certain weeks where you get a Kelce and you get a Waller in a decent matchup and you get all these different things. This week, none of that is true. If I'm going down as a GPP play, I think Jonnu Smith is interesting against New Orleans. This is a sneaky game that could shoot out. I think we've seen the Saints get into these 50 to 45 or more, even as of a couple weeks ago. Tennessee's offense does look good. Their defense looks horrible. And Smith seems to be progressing. It's a long shot. I don't like any of these guys. On FanDuel, I'm finding a way just to pay for Darren Waller. I think that the targets are too consistent, and the price differential between Waller and some of the lower end guys is about $700 to $800, which to me I can find somewhere. But I hate this position from top to bottom.
Well, that New Orleans Tennessee game should be one of the highest scoring games in the slate. Vegas has it at 50.
Yeah, but I'm talking like 70.
It's like 70 points. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that would be something. Any other tight ends before we move on?
I got one real quick.
And
that's Jared Cook in that same game. It's a weird game, right, where it's one of only 2 games on the slate with an over-under north of 50.
Right.
And it's close. Both teams have high implied team totals. But when you look at it, Michael Thomas is really the only player that is attracting the crowd. And Cook has been involved, and Tennessee has been sneaky bad against tight ends, especially when they face good ones. Looking back on their game logs, you got Jack Doyle got him for 673 and a touchdown. Travis Kelce 775 and a touchdown. Hunter Henry 6 for 97. Hooper 9 for 130. And most recently Darren Waller 6 for 72. So I think that could be a way that the Saints choose to attack the Titans. And why not attack the game that Vegas thinks is going to be high scoring that nobody seems too eager to stack?
Yeah. Let's talk about defenses. Phil, let's come right back to you.
Hold on.
Whoa.
I have to bring this up.
Sure.
It is the most ridiculous thing I think I've maybe ever done on this show.
Oh, no.
Stacking a starting quarterback with the opposing defense. Thoughts?
If it's Jameis Winston, it's okay, but he's
Will Grier in the Colts defense.
Oh
wow.
No,
we talked last week about Kyle Allen and in his sack. He had 5 sacks or more in 5 straight games, something like that. Do we think Will Grier is going to be any better? Probably not. He's probably going to throw an interception or 2. I like it in cash.
God.
No, you're right. That was the dumbest thing you've ever said in this show.
Why?
Look, could it work out? Sure. If the defense is mostly getting the points from sacks, maybe. It
raises your floor.
What?
Because here's the thing. I'm not expecting Will Grier to have 300 yards and 4 touchdowns.
He's just so cheap. Like you'd be playing him because he's so cheap.
I'm playing him, and I know he's going to get sacked. I know he's going to throw interceptions. I get the points from those sacks as well. So then, as I'm watching the game, it's okay. Just don't hand the ball off to McCaffrey. Either throw it to him, get sacked, or throw a pick 6.
Yeah, but Grier doesn't get the points for the touchdown if the other team scores. I think that's part of the problem.
But my defense does.
I know.
I think he throws a pick 6, but then he gets all the garbage time on top of it. I think it's brilliant.
I hate it. Like it could work.
It's next level thinking.
I don't know, man.
Level. It's down that way. Next level. It's the next level below.
Oh man, the people in the YouTube comments are gonna love that one.
Yeah. So if there's anyone out there who hates it or likes it, comment below.
Nice. All right. Now I'm completely lost. Hey, Phil, tell me about some defenses you like.
Sure. I'll take the softball and give you the Denver Broncos. I think they're going to be the top-owned defense on the slate. They're home, 7-point favorites against Detroit. David Blau, even though Devin thinks he's a baller, that really hasn't been playing out so well since like halftime of the Thanksgiving Day game. And so we've got 3 starts from Blau. He's been sacked 9 times. He's thrown 5 picks, and he completes 58% of his passes.
Small sample size. It's fine.
Nice.
All of the ingredients are there for an absolute disaster on the road for him in Denver. And, usually, especially in tournaments, defense is where I like to pivot off of the chalk just because it's such a highly volatile position. But this week, I think it's a rare week where I'm going to be following the crowd. I think the Broncos should cost at least $4,000, and they don't. So they're affordably priced, and I'm at least matching the field with them. And then I guess on the other side, I don't think anybody's looking at in fact, I know nobody's looking at the Jets defense against Pittsburgh, but they're home. It's Duck Hodges, and the Jets do have a good run defense, and that's the way that Pittsburgh likes to move the ball. Maybe Hodges is capable of exploiting their weakness in the secondary. I think it remains to be seen. So from a low-owned tournament perspective, the Jets at 3K, I think are viable anytime that you've got a third stringer like Hodges on the other side of the ball.
Devin does not like your Jets pick.
No. I actually do like it. I was putting up the Red Black Eye Joe for they won't be considered. I think on FanDuel they'll be one of the top defenses at 3,600.
Okay.
Gotcha. John, defense?
I like the Denver call for cash games against Detroit. Blau's he's holding on to the ball too long.
Baller.
He's a baller. 3,500. I think he's in play. I'm fine with at least half of Devin's equation, and that is that you can go with the Colts defense. I would not pair them with the opposing quarterback for cash.
You're going to lose money this week.
I hope you're wrong. I'm on a roll right now. I've had a couple good weeks, and as long as I'm playing folks who do what you're describing, I think I'll be okay. For GPPs, the two defenses that came up in terms of my model as being under-owned for the likelihood of reaching GPP value. One of them I'm ashamed to say, but the numbers are the numbers, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars against Atlanta.
What?
After everything, I know. I'm basically Devin.
So you have like 5 cash game plays, and then you're still starting the defense.
This is GPP only. GPP
you pulled
only.
like a 5x Devin right there.
No,
come on.
I've got Jacksonville as in terms of reaching GPP value. Now, keep in mind they're fairly cheap at $2,200. But I've got them at 18% likely to achieve GPP value, which is the highest on the entire slate. And they're only going to be owned at 3%. So there's a 15% delta there in terms of, wanting to get them into your lineup. I'll have them probably double the field around 5 to 6%. The other team is the Skins against the Giants. Very similar scenario. I actually think both of those defenses are in play for GPPs for what it's worth. And I'll stop there.
Is that if Daniel Jones starts, or if Manning?
Yes, it is.
It is.
Yep.
Okay.
Probably an upgrade if Eli starts.
Got it.
Wrong.
Devin is the president of the Eli fan club. Any other defenses, Devin?
No.
Okay, let's move on to stacks. John, I'm going to come back to you first for some stacks here. I'm guessing you're playing a million Falcons.
I've got the number one stack I've got is Atlanta team stack. You can go any which way you want. I won't go into any further detail. I like the Atlanta Falcons this week. I think Andy Dalton to Tyler Boyd is one that was not mentioned throughout the show. That's a stack that I like in that matchup, the battle of the basement dwellers against Miami.
Yeah.
Very similar to what was being said. I think Phil brought it up. Drew Brees to Michael Thomas. I mean, you're basically getting half of the Saints defense, and that matchup.
Saints offense
against Tennessee. What did I say? Defense.
Getting half of the Saints defense. Yeah.
I haven't messed up a name, so I had to mess up a side, I guess.
Yeah, and the best defense is a good offense.
There you go. You see, thanks for picking me up, brother.
I got your back.
And then the last one, Kyler Murray to Christian Kirk is one that I like quite a bit. I think Kirk is one of those guys you were talking about earlier. I look for touchdown regression. I think that he's in store for it, and this looks to be a good spot for him to get there.
Phil, who you stacking?
So definitely Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, but I think we've kind of covered that ground. I mentioned I like the double stack with Prescott and his outside receivers in Gallup and Cooper. And I'll throw one out there that's completely off the board, and that's Ryan Fitzpatrick and Albert Wilson, and not Devontae Parker. So I think that there is that chance that game could be high scoring. Vegas doesn't hate it. You know, they see it at where was it?
It's high 40s.
Yeah, it was high 40s. So that there's definitely the opportunity there for some points to go on the board, and it might have flown under the radar a little bit. But Albert Wilson, you know, he's been dealing with injuries all year, and you look at his snap shares, and you know they're usually hovering in the 40, 50, 30% range. And last week it was back up to 80, which is where we all expected him to be at the start of the season. This is an explosive player. This is one of the best yards after the catch receivers in the game. And the Bengals are just awful at every level of their defense. Last week he had 8 targets, seeing all those snaps. And I think if he has 8 targets again this week, I like his chances of breaking 1 or 2 long plays on that Bengals defense.
All right, Devin, who you stacking?
If he plays, I think I'm just gonna do it one last time. Week 16, Gardner Minshew and DJ Chark. DJ Chark. Coming back from injury this week. I think Jacksonville's sneaky. The way to beat the Falcons is through the air. If he doesn't play, I think Conley is firmly in play. I can't get behind D.D. Westbrook. How many chances are we going to give this guy? I'm over it. It's like an ex-girlfriend. And then I think that there is a Will Grier, Christian McCaffrey, Colts defense in cash for the win.
Oh. No, don't play the Colts defense there. If you stack those guys, fine. Stack them in cash if you want, but don't play the defense against them.
We'll see.
Well, like I could maybe see the quarterback situation because he's so cheap and he can reach value and still have a crappy game. But you're not going to pay up for CMC and then start the defense against him.
Yes, we are.
Oh my gosh. All right.
If anyone wants my cash game volume, I think I've played people every week and they haven't done so well. So comment below.
Yeah, those are the most common comments we get. We're like, Devin, give me your handle so we can face off.
There have been people that have beaten me, and I'll give credit to them. But
sure. All right, guys, that stacks. Let's go to parting thoughts. This is our season finale parting thoughts. So extra pressure on John to come up with something really good here for your parting thoughts. What do you got?
No extra pressure. I kind of gave a little foreshadowing. I think DraftKings is running some really cool contests this week. Week 16, before Christmas, buy your kids something nice. Put it all on the line. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding about all of those things. But they are running some really cool contests. I was jotting them down over the past few minutes just to make sure I didn't miss a few of them. If you're a high roller, they have a $1,500 buy-in, main event championship, $1 million to first place. Only
is that named the David Blau contest for ballers only?
They should.
It's called the Blau How You Like Me Now contest.
And I suspect that for most people that's out of their price range, but there's some other pretty cool contests. We talk a lot about MME, mass multi-entry, and if you want to kind of dip your toe in the waters, a couple different contests this week with huge payouts. They took my favorite contest, which is the $9 slant, which I typically do 150 entries into, and it's normally somewhere between 40 and 60,000 entries. This week, 261,000 entries. And so the entire prize pool is $2 million with 500,000 up top. So you could be a half a millionaire at the end of Sunday evening if you decided to go that route. And if $9 times 150 is a bit much for you, they do have a couple 20 entry max tournaments, one of which is $3. I think that one's called the play action. And then even if you just want to go a bit lower on the scale, and you can use our lineup optimizer by Simon Shepard, they have a 20 entry $half entry. So $10. For $10, you can play around with the lineup optimizer tool. My recommendation is if you're doing one of those 20 entry max, find one or two players that you like together. Maybe it's a stack. Maybe it's Will Grier in the Colts defense, and just hit the lock button and then build your lineups based on a player pool, because really what you're trying to do is to optimize around something you feel very strongly about. And I'll stop there.
Right on. Phil, thank you so much for joining us a couple of times on the Power Grid this season, filling in for Ryan. Any words of wisdom or parting thoughts for our listeners?
Yeah, I don't know if they're words of wisdom, but, here at Football Guys, we fully endorse responsible gaming and careful bankroll management. But guys, there's only 2 weeks left, and this is the last week before it becomes full Wild West in week 17 with all sorts of crazy things happening. And then we've got short playoff slates. I mean, listen, if you've been doing good this season and you can afford it, like John said, there's some really fun contests out there. Dip your toe in the water, loosen up the purse strings a little bit.
Return some kids' Christmas presents.
Don't do that. But get out there and have some fun this week because it's been a blast and it's coming to an end.
Devin, bring us home here. Words of wisdom, parting thoughts.
Yeah, if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, I highly recommend it. While this show's ending, there's content every week throughout the year with Sigmund Bloom and Matt Waldman and Gene Bramall and Cecil Lammy. Some OGs of this show. Have you been around here for the last, 3 years, 4 years? I don't know how long we've been doing this. But
this is our 4th season on video, I think. Yeah, for Power Grid.
Yeah, so go check them out. They host live streams. Go contact them, and I'm sure they'll interact with you. So even though we're stopping, the Football Guys machine doesn't stop. So.
Yeah, and those guys are especially good at scouting the new talent. And so they do a lot of fantastic shows throughout like draft season and, like looking at, sort of like the college guys that are coming up into the NFL. So you won't want to miss that.
And give them a hard time and say, I told you to do so.
Nice. Yes, please do. Well, thank you all for listening and watching. We really appreciate you being with us for this season. We will miss you while we're gone, and we will see you again next season. Be sure to check out all of our content at footballguys.com. This is our season finale, so we'll see you next August with a preseason episode like we usually do. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Phil Alexander, as well as Ryan Hester, who is out tonight, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching. And thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.